Hello again, this is Brian Kidd with Unriddler, and today we are talking about the SAP ALV grid. In this section, we'll talk about exporting the data. As much as we appreciate all the functionality that the ALV grid offers, there will be times where we want to export the data, and in some cases it may be someone who needs the data, does not know how to run the report themselves, they may not have access to SAP, or we may want to do some further analysis on the data, and that's when it comes in handy to export it, especially to a spreadsheet software like Excel. And Excel does some things quite well, and it would make sense at some point to export the data and maybe do further analysis in a spreadsheet software. We'll also discuss exporting the data to a word processing format. Typically, when I think of word processing, I think of Microsoft Word, but it could be other word processing formats, and we'll discuss each of those. And we'll also discuss some additional export options. These options have been there, I guess, from the beginning, since certainly since I've been using SAP. So I would say it's been there 15 years or so. And some of the options that we'll see on the spreadsheet and word processing are newer in the sense that they're not quite as old as the other options that we'll discuss. But these options are still available, and for whatever reason, if you like those options better or have gotten used to those over the years, I will show you about exporting using those options. The first thing that we're going to talk about in exporting the data, we will export the data to a spreadsheet software or in a spreadsheet software format. And I want to just briefly discuss one of the things that is quite neat about SAP and exporting, but in some ways I don't really care for it. And what that is SAP now allows us to export the data in the grid, even if it's been filtered or it's been sorted or anything like that. Now, previously, what would happen is if I had a sort or I had a filter on the data set in the ALV grid, when I go to export the data, it would prompt me to let me know that the sorting and the any totaling or subtotals would not be carried over in the spreadsheet. Uh, SAP has adjusted that, and now when you go to export the data, so if I were to choose this data set and chose to export it, it would carry along both the total on the value and reporting currency field and the subtotaling on the cost element, and it would even carry along some of the formatting. So the formatting that I see here, that I see it on my screen, it's a yellow color. That formatting is carried along. Now the reason I tend not to have my totals or subtotals exported is because once it's exported, it has applied that formatting, and although it's in a subtotal uh, format in Excel, uh, those subtotal line items remain even if I remove the subtotaling. So I'm going to briefly show you that, and it will you'll better understand why I choose not to carry over any totaling or any subtotals to SAP. But I'm going to go ahead and export this. And to export it, there's a couple of different ways to do it. It's somewhat odd to me that some options on the ALV grid toolbar are available in some reports and not available in other reports, especially in custom reports. If there's a custom report that is using the ALV grid, the developer in some cases has to explicitly add that option to the toolbar. And if they don't do that, you may not see some of these options on the toolbar. So don't get too scared off, because even if the option is not available in the toolbar, it will always be available in the menu bar. So I do have the option here to export to word processing or export to a spreadsheet, but if I did not have that option on the toolbar, I can always go here and choose List, Export, and then from here choose Spreadsheet. So that's what I'm going to do. If this is going to carry out the same function it would if I were to click on the toolbar option, but let's click on Export to Spreadsheet. Now once I choose Export, I now get an option of different formats. And the first option is in MHTML format. Uh, if you were to choose this option, the icon that you'll see on your desktop or wherever you place it will look different, but essentially once you open it in Excel, you could choose to leave it in that format or save it as a different format. But the first option is in that MHTML format. The second option is in the Star Office 8 or Open Office format. Now, I don't know a great deal about Star Office, but I know with Open Office is a free suite of tools that are very similar to Microsoft Office, uh, but it is by a different vendor and it has, of course, different options. But if you happen to be using that software rather than Microsoft Office, you may choose to export it in that format. And then this third radio button, if I were to choose this, then I have this drop down list where I can export it, and some of those options that are listed above are also included here, which, for example, MHTML, but I also have some other options like XML or XXL. What I'm going to use today is, and I think most of us that have been using Office, at least from Office 2007 on, we're used to seeing this XSLX format, and that's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose this format, and I'm going to also choose to continue. Now, if this is something that I use quite often, and I always want to export it to Office 2007, I can check this box here and it will save that so that next time I try to export, it won't bother prompting me with this small dialog here. It will go ahead and export it to the format that I've chosen. In this case, I'm not going to choose that because we want to look at some of these other things. But let's choose to continue, and now it's prompted me that this is a save as dialog. You'll see this all through the Windows platform. If I want to save even an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, I would choose uh, I would see this save as dialog, but I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm going to let the name of export stay there because this is not something I'm going to keep, and I'm going to choose save. And here I'm getting a prompt from the GUI. The GUI is telling me that, hey, the system is trying to execute the program or display the file, and do you want to grant access? In this case, I do want to grant access because once I save the data in that format, I also want it to go ahead and open Excel. So I'm going to choose remember my decision, and I'm going to choose allow so that the program can actually open Excel. So now that I got Excel open, I can see that my data was exported. I can see that my subtotals were carried over. My totals were carried over if I were to scroll over. But and the reason I typically do not choose this option, if I were to go to my data tab and go to subtotals and just say I want to remove all subtotals, you can see the subtotals were removed, but because this was carried over from SAP, I did not get rid of these subtotal rows. And for my analysis, I typically will use a pivot table or apply my own subtotal, and I don't like the fact that these are carried over because essentially this would give me bad data if I was trying to add a total now, because I not only have the detailed data, I also have the subtotal data that would get picked up and summarized. So for that reason alone, I choose not to carry over any formatting. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go back to my report. And if there's a layout that I use quite a bit, and I usually use it in the sense that I would export it to Excel, I would tend to go ahead and save a layout. I'm not going to save this layout, but you can use what we learned in the previous video on layouts to create a layout if you choose to. But I'm going to remove the total. Now I'm removing the subtotal, and I'm going to apply those changes. And now I've got, the type of data we tend to see in Excel before we start doing analysis. And this is a very tabular format. There's no subtotals. It's very plain vanilla format. And this is what I like to use when I export the data to Excel. So from here, I'm going to, instead of going to my list, export, spreadsheet, I'm going to use this option on the toolbar of exporting it to the spreadsheet from here. You can see it's remembered my last selection. I chose select from all available formats, and then within that I've chosen the 2007 format. I'm going ahead and apply that, and I'll again be prompted with the Save As dialog. I'm going to choose Save As. I'm going to just let it keep this name and save it. And it's telling me, yeah, you've already got a file, or do you want to replace it? I'm going to say yes here. And I could have named that anything, but I just... Okay, now you can see that the data has exported to Excel. I can see my data, but I don't have all these subtotals and the sorting going on. I'm seeing the data in a very vanilla format. It's tabular. It's very easy to work with in a pivot table, or if you want to add your own subtotals. So that's the way I tend to like to do it. If you like the formatting, you like exporting, you may not going to do any further analysis. You're only going to save the Excel spreadsheet and send it to someone or use later. You may choose to export the sorting and the subtotals, and that would be perfectly fine to do so. Okay, we've discussed exporting to Excel, or more specifically a spreadsheet format. Let's now look at our option to export the data in a word processing format. And I can choose a word processing format from the toolbar, or going back to my list, export, and I can choose word processing here. So I'm going to open the dialog from here. If, for example, and this is only for those of you that are familiar with Microsoft Word and their mail merge, if I were to use this first option, it would actually take the SAP data, and that SAP data would serve as the source data for mail merge. So for example, if I had a list of vendors and addresses that were listed in the report that I was looking at, and I wanted to create a letter for each of those vendors, I could easily do it by using the Microsoft Mail Merge functionality within Word. Now, Mail Merge is outside the scope of this video, but I want you to know that you do have that as an option, as with any Mail Merge within Word. We can use Excel, we could use Access, we could use some other list to populate the data. I want you to know that it is available to you to create a mail merge documents using SAP ALV grid data. Okay, for me, that's not something I'm interested in at this time, so I'm going to choose create a document, and then I don't care about including the colors, but I do want to start up Microsoft Word after I export it. So I've chosen create document and start MS Word, and then I'm going to apply that. And again, I get the Save As dialog. I'm going to choose the desktop, and I'm going to just say ALV grid export to RTF format. And I say RTF format because that is the default that is set up down here, the RTF format. And that's something that Microsoft Word is certainly capable of opening RTF documents. So I'm going to choose Save. And because I chose this Start MS Word, it's going to go ahead and open Microsoft Word for me. And let me minimize this and drag this over. Now I'm using Office 2013, so some of this may look a little different, but this is in fact Microsoft Word. And you can see that it has created a table within Microsoft Word and exported my data in that format. Finally, I want to show some of the, and these are older options, but there are a couple that may come in handy. It may save you a step, and I'll show you those by going to List, Export, and instead of choosing word processing or spreadsheet that we've already talked about, I'm going to choose Local File. And under Local File, once I choose that, I'm going to have 5 different options. Now, I won't discuss all of these in great detail, but the unconverted essentially is going to create a text file. You won't find that especially helpful. The second option is Spreadsheet. You would think that it would export it as a spreadsheet that we got when we used the other option on the list export menu, but that is not the case. This is an old spreadsheet format that sometimes will even generate a file that you can't open. So I would highly recommend not using that. Use the other spreadsheet option. The rich text format we've seen before. The one that you may find a bit helpful is this HTML format. If you wanted to display it on maybe a SharePoint list or somewhere else, and rather than exporting it to Excel or Microsoft Word and then create an HTML document, you want to generate one directly from here, you can do it, and I'm going to show you at least that option. You also have an option to export or save it to the clipboard. I won't show you that because when it carries all the formatting, it's not just carrying the data, it carries the formatting, everything around it. So copying it to the clipboard may not be very helpful to you either. But I will at least show you this HTML format. I'm going to choose HTML format. I'm going to proceed. And once I choose this HTML format, I'm going to get this dialog that's a bit different than the Save As dialog. I'm seeing a directory here that's defaulting to my directory, and it's put in a file name extension for me, but I'm going to just choose ALV grid data in HTML format, and I'm going to choose to generate that. And you can see it's telling me that the bytes have been transferred, but it doesn't open the data set for me. But let me go over to my desktop, and I'm going to open the file, and then we'll minimize it. Let's see what we have here. And I'm using Chrome, but this would look the same in Microsoft Internet Explorer or Firefox. But basically, it's created an HTML document, and it's carried along with it the formatting. And very similar to Microsoft Word, it's created a grid or a table to display the data. But if there ever was a need to create it in the HTML format, I want to let you know that that is available to you by using this list, export, local file, and then the HTML format.